words are like they I don't even know how to put that really to start off this broadcast. Words do more than you think, and if you're not careful, words will do more damage and do more harm than good than you may think, because I believe there is a lot of truth to a lot of things that are out there. There's a lot of truth to the words that we do speak. There's a lot of truth to things that we accept, things that we share, things that we commonly share. And if we're not careful of the words that we use, if we're not conscious of the words that we use and the effect that words do have, it will sneak up from behind you and stab you in the back. If that makes any sense to anybody. Because words are dangerous. Words can be a salvation of sorts, and they can be good. But if you don't understand the words that you are using and the context that you are using those words, they will do more harm than good. So sometimes I do download some stuff from places like Facebook and Twitter and other places like this, and I write things down, and from books that I read or movies that I'm watching, or so let me just say that I am not correct in everything that I do. I might be totally outright wrong, and I'm willing to admit such things, or accept that I was misled on something. Because you see, what has been on my mind a lot lately, and in my heart a lot lately, is this one post that I did see on Facebook, and that post was a picture of Bruce Lee, and I cannot recall if it was supposed to have been a quote from him or anything like that, but the sentiment of that post was better be careful, was not to speak poorly about yourself. Don't speak poorly about yourself was the main point of all that. Because language, words, according to this post, which I believe has merit and holds truth, might not be absolute true, but it holds truth. If you know the difference between something being true and something holding truth. Might not be absolute true, but it holds. Is that language and words are spells. And when you speak words, you're casting a spell. And when you speak words in a certain context or a certain concept, that's casting a spell. And when you talk poorly about yourself, even in a joking manner, you're casting a spell upon yourself that won't do you any good, especially if you're speaking poorly about yourself or anything else like that, or about somebody else. And that makes a lot of sense to me.
I own the lumber mill and pay a fair wage. See my husband hard if you're looking.
And,
Feindal thinks he can woo Camilla Valerius away from me. She's already mine, I keep telling him.
So you think about the way society is right now. There is very little love in this world. There's very little trust, very little humility, very little patience. There's very little anything in this world because of the words that are being used collectively and the context they are being used in. So a lot of stuff that I see a lot of stuff that I do see on things like Facebook, the sentiments that I see on Facebook, the context, the sentiment, is that don't trust anybody, don't trust your loved ones, don't trust your family, don't trust yourself, don't trust. But if you don't trust, you'll never have closeness. Never have closeness with anybody. And if you don't have closeness, you'll never have love. You'll never have togetherness. All you'll have is hate. And that's what's spreading in the world right now. There's so much hate. And it's coming from inside the
citizen.
The individual person,
none of your concern,
and it's being accepted because of the words that are being used. Don't trust anybody. Don't love nobody. Don't do anything like that. Is the sentiments that's being put out there. And if you do that often enough, you will begin to believe it eventually. You tell people a lie enough, they will start believing the lie and living that lie.
I'm gonna kill you. Must have scared him off.
You handle yourself well. You could make for a decent shield, brother.
So when I saw that post with the picture of Bruce Lee and talking about how we have to be careful of the words that we use and the context that we use those words in, that does
An outsider, eh?
hold a
Never
lot
heard of
of
the
the truth
An
to me.
order of warriors. We are brothers and sisters in honor. And we show up to solve problems if the
And
coin is
when
good
you
enough.
say things and do things to take away from your own well-being, it will do harm to you eventually, because all you'll have left is what you put out there. And when you talk about words and phrases and context and sentiments as being a spell cast you, because because according to that post, it says that that's why it's called spelling, because you're casting a spell with these words. And that makes sense to me. That makes sense to me because the more you do something, the more entrenched it will become.
Fight with us and you'll have stories to tell.
So if you really
if you're worth anything in a
look
fight.
at the things that you are putting forth, if you put them out there without looking at the outcome that it's going to produce, or even seeing what the outcome is going to be, you are saying things blindly without the knowledge that's going behind it. So you got to be careful when you talk about, especially about yourself, that, and to put that into real context with people. Take a look at the context and other things that, and people may get tired of me saying this, look what feminism has done to this world. What feminism has done to the country known as Canada and Bill C-51. Because a lot of what feminists put out there, has put out there, that I've seen a lot of in the last 10 years, is that all men are rapists. And all sex is rape. And that sentiment and those words have been used over and over and over and over again, to the point where men even defend that sentiment, that men are even accepting that lie, that falsehood, that harm. Because out of that sentiment came Bill C-51, which strips men of their right to defend themselves when they're accused of sexual assault. And that brought about Bill C-51 out of Gomeshi, because those women that were making the claim were shown to be liars and lied about Gomeshi. You see? And when you accept a notion about yourself like that, that not only takes away from yourself on how you view yourself, and how it takes away from humanity, it takes away from society, it takes away from the heart, and it plants it in your head. And that external influence, without the involvement of the heart and the consciousness of yourself and the consciousness of mankind, to look at a sentiment like that, you'll become a shell. You'll become an object. Whether you are the one spewing it or the one accepting it, thinking we don't have the power to change that, but we do have the power to change that, because words are power. Your understanding of it is power. But more importantly, your acceptance of it is power as well. And when you only do something through your head without putting it through the judgment of your consciousness through your heart, you will never get the full understanding of that, because you have given up your own power. to accept what somebody else wants you to be, as opposed to who you are. And when you give up yourself, when you give up your consciousness, your ability to evaluate something, to look at something and decide for yourself if that is good or bad, or right or wrong, you'll be living blinded for the rest of your life. You'll be living blinded. That's why when people like me and people like David Wilcock or Corey Good or David Icke or anybody else that you might think of that speaks against the status quo and brings forth the truths that are actually around us for what they are. And that's why we are ridiculed, why we are abandoned, why we are threatened, why we are not accepted. Because everybody wants to be accepted, you see. Everybody wants to be accepted. Everybody does. I do. But because I speak the things that I speak about and put it in the context that I do, in the truths that life has brought to me, that doesn't fit with mainstream, it's a dangerous thing, because that's when people get hurt. That's when people get lynched, literally, physically lynched, killed, beat up, and banished from their own community where they belong. So if you don't look at things, and if you don't understand what you are speaking, the words that you are speaking, if you don't understand it, don't understand it, you're living blind. And that blindness and ignorance will be passed on to the next generations, and the next, and the next, and the next. That's why when you look at what's being told about what's going on in society when it comes to the education system and this generation, that's where it begins, in the schools. Because these students these days, many of them don't know how to spell. They don't know how to read, even though they're sitting in class every day. They don't know how to write. And when you don't know how to do something yourself, you'll only look for fast-track mechanisms to give you those fast answers, those instant answers where the individual doesn't have to look into anything for him or herself. They just have to Google something, see the first thing that they see. But when you look into something and research something and find out what a word means, or a sentence means, or the context that it's put to people, when you find out what it actually means, you will see that many things that are said these days do more harm than good, because it takes away from the individual. And when you take away from the individual, you take away from the collective. If that makes any sense to people. To give you another example, think of the term Native American, Native Canadian. Those two things could not hold more lies than they do. Because when you call yourself a Native Canadian or Native American, you're turning away from your own culture. You're turning away from your own belief system that you claim is you live by, but you can't live by. You can't live by somebody else's perception of you or what they want you to be if you don't give up who you are first. Because that one post I saw today, it talked about, and it might hold some truth, but the idea was that back in 1492, the reality of it was that Native Americans discovered Christopher Columbus lost at sea. Yeah, okay, I could see why people would say that, because that does hold some truth. But that term, Native Americans, is the lie within that, because Native Americans did not exist in 1492. Because America didn't exist in 1492. If that makes any sense to people, because when I put stuff like that down in the comment section of that, people got angry with me. Go back to school. You don't know what you're talking about. You know, but how much do you know about that term, Native American, Native Canadian? It's a politically correct term. It's an external influence term put onto us by an external force to strip us of our identity. Because like I said, America didn't exist in 1492. Native Americans didn't exist in 1492. That came later. And the lie about that is that there was no indigenous people. That's the lie. And that indigenous people don't exist. If that makes sense to people, that makes sense to me. And I know it makes sense, what I just said makes sense to some people. But now we gotta start speaking these truths and challenging these lies. Because if you don't challenge it, either publicly or challenge it within yourself, you will never come to the actual meaning of it. Because back in 1492, in what is known as America now, what did they have? 500 nations. Nations. Cultures. And they were similar in belief systems. The differences come in the actual practicing of these cultures and the spiritual beliefs and the spiritual practices. So you see, when you accept that term Native American or Native Canadian, you're only killing your own culture and your own identity that you claim you have. So you see, coming from the Gulf of Mexico up through Florida, up through Canada, there were many nations. Ojibwe Nation, Seminoles, the Pueblos, the And when you come up through, the Iroquois people, the Cree people, none of them were hyphenated. None of them took on somebody else's identity. But now that we are taking on these falsehood identities, we are killing our own culture, and we are killing our own identity for somebody else's agenda. And that might sound like bullshit to a lot of people, but I challenge you to look at it for yourself, to look into yourself and find out for yourself if what I said holds truth or not. You see? But because humanity has been dumbed down, where even going to school, people are no longer learning how to read and write and understand even what they're reading and writing. It's a dumbed down humanity now, blinded by external influences, for external influences, instead of letting things flow from the inside and flow from the heart, from your consciousness outward. You're oppressing yourself by letting these external influences come down over you. So you got to understand the things that you put forth, and you got to understand the words that you speak and the sentiments that you speak. You see what I mean? So you take the Aboriginal peoples of Northern...
Just so you know, I'm still here listening. I'm just on mute,
Yep.
watching the baby.
Okay. Okay. So you take the Aboriginal peoples of Turtle Island, and people know when Aboriginal people say Turtle Island, they mean North America. Okay? And I even think it was before. Consider the Jay Treaty. And I wish I could have it right in front of me where I could say it with 100% certainty. But with great certainty, I can tell you this. The Jay Treaty was a treaty signed right around the time of the Declaration of Independence of 1776, which guarantees Aboriginal peoples free travel across what's called the international borders, because the international borders do not exist for Aboriginal people. So you consider the international borders, how they run across the continent, east to west or west to east, whichever way you want to say it. They run horizontally across the continent. Now, to be Canadian, to be an American, to be a Mexican, you got to acknowledge that border. For Aboriginal people, those borders do not exist because our traditional borders ran north-south, south-north. They did not run east-west. So if you want to call yourself Native Canadian, Native American, you must.
Yeah, I don't got the baby no more. Ooh.
You must no longer acknowledge the Jay Treaty or your traditional borders that run north and south. You must acknowledge the east-west border that separates Canada from America and America from Mexico. Those are the borders you must acknowledge now. If that makes sense to people, and I hope it does, because you see, people in north of the U.S.-Canadian border, in Canada, Aboriginal people, what you got to understand is this: when that Jay Treaty was signed, the way I was told on who signed it, Canada did not sign the Jay Treaty. The United States of America did, and England did, but Canada did not. Canada did not sign those original treaties like the Robinson-Huron Treaty. That's why Canada, for the last 200 years, has been trying to find the end around those treaties, because they didn't sign it, and so Canada doesn't have no obligation to it, because they weren't the original signatories or signees or whatever the word is. They did not create it. They did not create those treaties, but they're doing everything they can to circumvent them and destroy them, and they're doing it by having us doing it to ourselves, by the identity that they want us to take, Native Canadian, as opposed to Ojibwe, Iroquois, Cree, Micmac, Cree. They want us to identify ourselves as Canadian and or American. They want us to do it to themselves, and that's what we are doing, unfortunately, is we are doing it to ourselves now. So if that makes sense to people, I hope it does, because words do more than you think, because language is a form of magic. You could say it casts spells, and the more you put forth a certain sentiment, a certain context, the more you will believe it and the more you will identify with it. I am Ojibwe, Anishinaabeg. I am not Canadian, nor am I American. That's because those treaties, the original treaties, guarantee my sovereignty, not only of self, but of nation, to be who I am, not what somebody else wants me to be. And with that, I will leave that right there, because I don't want to sound redundant, that I'm repeating myself. But just consider what I said and understand that words do more than you think.